All right, welcome to the True Stripes podcast. This is a show about marketing and authentic branding. And our guest today is Jack Liebl, who is a creative director at Capital One. Jack, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat to you.
Yeah, it should be a good discussion. One of the things I'm always interested in is like looking back at a career path and kind of seeing how you got to the place that you are now. So tell us, like, how does a person go from, being young, being out of college to being a creative director at such a huge global company?
Yeah, I guess you just really know where life is going to take you. But it's your drive and your passion for what you do that really and what you make of every situation that help propel you forward. I started out in an in-house position for a brief amount of time and then quickly migrated over to the agency world. And in the span of the past 20 years, I've worked on a number of different brands, not any specific category for too long. But the one thing that kind of binds all of those brands together are the sort of iconic nature of them, the how well known they are, people's strong perceptions of them, the heritage and that perception, and how it can positively and negatively affect that brand, and how we as marketers and creative directors and creatives in general can help to shape some of that perception. That's always interested me, and I've always chased those opportunities, and that's how I ended up in the position I am right now.
Yeah, I always think that's such a unique challenge working with a really established legacy brand. And in some cases, marketers are dealing with are still kind of handling reacting to ad campaigns that the brand did decades ago. Like I saw an Avis commercial the other day, and it's like part of it was like a reference to an iconic ad campaign that did like 60 or 70 years ago. That's such an interesting challenge to be. You're creating marketing for now, but you do have to kind of account for where that brand has been in people's minds in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, it can be a great thing and it can be a good thing. Like where would Avis be without that heritage of great marketing and iconic ads that they've developed in the past? But at the same time, that can be a real drag on things that they want to accomplish in the future.
Yeah.
I think that's been the same case for me, I think, and for the brands I've worked on. The fact that you can push against some of those perceptions and surprise people gives you a lot of opportunity. And I think for any brand, there's always that sort of desire from the people that are as close to it as us that work on it, that want to push against people's perceptions, but you always have to, be respectful to your customers, to your audience, and really what makes your brand stand out from others.
Speaking of brand, I know that a lot of what you're focusing on at Capital One is brand partnerships. Tell us about that and what that work involves.
Yeah, so I'm a creative director within the brand partnerships group, and what that really means is Capital One partners with a number of different brands offering credit cards and different credit products. And a big component of that are retail brands, some national retailers that we partner with. I specifically work on REI and Williams-Sonoma, and I help to market their credit card products. So for me, it's really a continuation of what I've done in the past on brands like Corona or Boeing or New Balance or Starbucks. It's really working with the outside people that are in charge of that brand, the people at the company, getting to know the brand, getting to understand the brand, getting to understand how they work. And then with the added sort of complexity of bringing it into the Capital One ecosystem. So can be a big challenge at a lot of times to really kind of, if you think about it as like a marriage of two brands, yeah, there has to be some amount of compatibility or some amount of give in order for them to work together and to play nice within their respective channels or buckets or anywhere that the brand shows up. Down from the biggest decisions down to the smallest details, you really get a better understanding and a respect for really what makes a dynamic and robust brand.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really next level creative challenge, right? Like sometimes it can be hard enough working with one brand, but you're doing a program with two brands at once. What's the creative approach like that? I mean, are you literally like day one, like you're sitting down with the two brand guys looking for overlap between the two? How do you even start that?
I think number one is to have a firm understanding of our brand. I have a firm understanding of the Capital One brand. So, that's definitely step one. And I think there's really no set way to go about it because the brands we partner with are so diverse.
Yeah.
And they, if you look at REI or WSI, they're pretty different, but we also have Walmart, Menards, varying different companies with different specialties, different audiences. And I think, at the core, all the brands are they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to connect with their audience. When you bring it into the world of finance, there are different things that come into play. And it kind of guides some of the thinking about what part of those brands are most important. So, we really kind of focus in on sort of the bullseye of each brand and what they bring to the table. And for us, we may bring something that the other brand actually needs in order to market to our credit card audience. But it really is kind of finding those commonalities. And sometimes it's just, I wish there was like an easy answer, but you never know. It just depends.
Yeah. I mean, those customer bases are so different depending on the person who's going to REI for some kind of like adventure gear is different than like if your grandmother's going to Williams Sonoma for some really high-end cooking gear or something like that. It's going to be a unique challenge for each. One of the things you and I've joked about in the past is kind of like high level like brand philosophy. Like every like brand guru out there is like, a brand is a conversation. And then another guy will be like, you can find like a YouTube video, be like, a brand is not a conversation. A brand is a promise, and you've said in the past that you see a brand as like the sum total of the interactions that you have with your customers, then it exists in your customer's mind. Can you talk about that philosophy and how that informs the work that you do?
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to define a brand. And I think to me, it really is what people think of you. It's your reputation. It is a promise. The promise will provide you some focus on like what your brand purpose is. But again, I think it's just things are so complicated in the world that it's hard to put any real definition into something as nebulous as a brand. People kind of throw that term around to even mean their own reputation. So I think that what interests me is, when you look at sort of what most people would say is a brand, they would tell you the logo, the colors, maybe the TV commercial they do or something. For me, it's more than just the visual identity of the brand. It's how the brand behaves. And that behavior can happen anywhere. And I think right now there are so many opportunities for brands to behave in unique ways, whether it's through your phone or through an experience that you stumble upon, or their website, or just even an interaction with the call center. All those things inform people's reputation or perception of the brand, and they all can have a really positive or negative effect. So for me, I think I'm really interested in finding sort of the edges around the core traditional understanding of a brand and figuring out where those opportunities lie to make the biggest impact, create moments that resonate with people, to shape their perception, hopefully a positive way.
Yeah, you're alluding to something that I think is so interesting and such a modern brand challenge, in that there are so many touch points of a brand now, versus like 50 years ago, pre-internet, right? You had maybe you saw, or the radio and TV commercials, maybe you got like a catalog in the mail, and then maybe you saw a customer at the store, right? Now there are so many more touch points, and there are so many more places for a brand to kind of fall apart. And to me, now the challenge is not just like building like those affirmative steps of a brand, but like making sure it doesn't fall apart at the tiniest moment. Because I noticed that, and maybe it's just that I work in marketing, but it's like I notice those things that like take me out of the brand, like have some experience online or experience with a live person that's like, that doesn't feel like the brand. And now it feels like the whole like fairy tale is like broken.
Yeah. I mean, people interact with brands far more than they ever have before. So and that interaction is truly interaction. It's not just a passive thing where they're seeing something that's kind of put in front of them. So there are plenty of moments when your perception or your opinion of a brand can fall apart. And then there's also a tremendous opportunity in recognizing like how you can make a difference and how you can connect with an audience, or how you can even, create a moment that really resonates with them, that is tied back to sort of why your brand, or the sort of reason your brand exists, or what you're offering your customer or your target.
Yeah, I think like I'm always looking for that simplistic, like a brand is blank, like what's my angle on that? But I think you're right that like there's no hard and fast answer, because there are so many touch points, and like you can have a brand that you interact with first as a live experience with a person. And you can also have a brand where it's built entirely on TikTok and it comes in that way. So it's hard to, it's complex, and it's hard to make any hard and fast rules about what a brand is or how a brand is even created.
Yeah, I think with Capital One, a great example of this is the Capital One cafes.
Yeah. Huge
That is
that place.
something that was really revolutionary when it started, and it continues to be. The idea that a bank isn't something with, you know, bars on the window that you have to like scan your card in and walk up to a teller, that it could be a venue and an experience where you can relax, you can learn, you can meet with friends, and one that's open to anybody, whether or not they're a customer. I think that has such a profound effect on people's perception of the brand in a way that, you know, a lot of other companies may not think about, or even our customers may not necessarily have thought about, really reimagining how that whole experience can happen. And I do think there's more opportunities to do things like that right now than there ever were. We're not as locked into the traditional methods of you know, demonstrating who we are, why we matter as a brand. That's not to say that those other things aren't important. They're still important. And even Capital One really leans into the, you know, the things that we do day to day that everybody recognizes us for. But there are all these additional moments and opportunities to take advantage to kind of build your brand and create a more sort of robust and positive impression of who you are.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like creating those Capital One cafes was a really visionary, like courageous step for the Capital One brand, because I imagine that the ROI of that cafe is hard to measure, right, compared to something else. But I'll say from personal experience, it absolutely works. Like my most recent trip to a Capital One cafe, I have a few Capital One cards, and I was actually thinking about canceling one of them because I don't use it that much. And then I went there and I was like, actually, this brand's pretty cool. I was kind of like, I really appreciate that this exists. No, never mind. I'm going to keep it now.
Yeah.
But a lot of brands don't think about that, right? They're like, they don't just do like goodwill things or social things, or like, let's create an experience, even if it's not perfectly measurable. I mean, that is such a huge opportunity.
And I think, I mean, I would say it is measurable, and it's measurable in ways that aren't necessarily expected. And I think that's, you know, that is another important thing too, to understand how do you define the success for your brand. I think that's been a constant challenge, right, for longer than we've been working. There are things that you do to build a brand over the long term that are hard to quantify and may not necessarily immediately pay off. But building a brand is certainly more than a 6-month journey or even a year journey.
Yeah. You know, you've talked about in the past, like in your experience with brand partnerships, making sure a brand really aligns with like the people who represent it. And I know I've experienced that so much in working with startups and small businesses. Is like, it's so important to make sure that the brand feels congruent with the person that's going to sell it, because there's nothing worse than like meeting with someone and then like seeing their brand, like these two things don't go together at all. How do you think about that with your partnerships, and like, how have you experienced that in the past?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely believe that great brands are built within. I think it just provides you with so much more ability to, you know, take advantage of opportunities or make really difficult decisions when you have something that reflects not only like outward what you're trying to present, but inward who you are. And people can really, I think people can tell when there's, you know, something funny going on, when the brand doesn't really reflect the company. And I think it can actually cause a lot more problems if you don't live up to some of the image you're projecting outside. So when I think back of some of the projects and some of the clients I've worked on that I'm most proud of, that have performed the best, they've kind of all had that idea of the brand as kind of like the rallying cry or the representation of who they are and how they operate, how they do business. I know that's maybe not always possible. There are certainly companies that license brands or have a number of brands. But I think even then, there's definitely ways that you can lean into some of the characteristics of you as maybe a founder or your organization and the people that work there to kind of identify some of the ways in which you're different from everybody else. I mean, if you think of some of the biggest brands like Apple, like that's entirely true. Thinking differently has driven their company for decades, and it's shaped people's perception of their brand and their products as well. So like I said, I think that that's just a great way to make branding something that's really difficult. Anytime you're doing something for yourself, it's even more difficult. It's just a great way of thinking about authentically, like who you want to be and how are you representing yourself in the market?
Yeah, Apple has done a really good job of, they know exactly who they are, and then they're like relentlessly consistent about that. Like, did you see the thing recently about how when the Apple executives give keynotes, they even all hold their hands the same way? Like, where they compared like 4 or 5 recent speeches by Apple executives, and they're all like holding their hands like this, and their hands right here up in the front. I mean, it's clearly like that's a little over the top, but great brands are looking at those little details. And
yeah, I think their push on privacy too has been reflective of that, thinking differently, about things. Even the way they market it is it clearly like we are different than everybody else. We're thinking about this stuff that other companies and our competitors are not. So yeah, it's really easy to come up with sort of your strategic vision and where you want to be in regards to the business when when a lot of that is informed by who you are as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So Capital One, you're really focused on, obviously, on financial services. What do you think, pivoting to that industry for a few minutes, like, what do you think makes a really strong brand in the financial services industry? And what are the kind of the brand opportunities or challenges in that?
Yeah, for sure. The financial industry can be very complex. It's just even the definition of that, something we talk about, like it is hard to define sort of a typical company within that industry. There's so many different offerings and so many different just things happening on a day-to-day basis, new products that are launched, new categories that are launched. It's different than, I would say it's different than, buying lipstick or sneakers, right? Where you might take a chance at a brand, you might try something out. In the financial industry, for me, the biggest thing that is important is trust. When you're talking money, people have to trust you as a brand, as a company, in order to give their money to you. And you have to, demonstrate that trust you have to build that trust like from the start continuously. That doesn't mean that the brand, like financial brands, all have to be the same. Like trust can manifest in many different ways. Yeah. It could be maybe your history or heritage. It could be what you do for the community. There are any number of different ways you can define trust as a brand. It could be just the brand's personality, trying to be really approachable or really sort of less like a bank and more like a human, like we try to be. But I think that's the biggest differentiator.
Yeah, that's a unique challenge where it's like you're trying to be memorable and different and human, but you can't like go too crazy because it is about money and it's about a lot of money. And so yeah, I think there's an interesting generation of financial services brands now, and Capital One included, which have done a good job of injecting, they feel like human brands, but they're not, it's not a joke, right? They're like, they're pleasant, but it's not, you can only go so far.
You can have fun, but yeah,
yeah,
you have to be respectful of sort of what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, there's so many different ways to build that trust, and certainly making like more authentic and human connections with people is something that every brand does, regardless, or I'd say any brand could do, whether or not they're in the financial industry or not. Trust plays an important role in a lot of things. Airbnb, I would say that's one of the defining aspects of that brand and what they try to do. Yeah, building that trust, creating a human connection. I think one thing that maybe gets overlooked is consistency. And that's something we talk about a lot. When it comes to building trust within the financial industry, making sure your brand is consistent, you're showing up in the same way, not just in a, just because it's the right thing to do, or because the logo is the logo, but the more consistent you are, the more people, may trust you, may reflect positive on you. And also with fraud going on and different things out there that people are trying to, work the system or get around things, like having a consistent brand really puts a lot of trust in, like, yes, this is an email from this organization.
Yeah, it's the little
Kind of an
things.
overlooked aspect. And I think that would, like, again, like, it works in the financial industry, but for any brand, making sure that you are consistent in your assets and how they come to life, so that nobody else can come in and swoop in, and imposters can pop up and try to speak to your brand in ways that you would never want to.
Yeah, I would imagine that the average consumer in their financial, like interacting with financial brands, are actually more attuned to like the brand guide in their head than they realize. Like, it probably wouldn't take very much to be like, this email doesn't look right. This website doesn't look right. It's kind of a strange victory for branding, where they're like, wait, this is inconsistent, because they're sensitive, they're so attuned to like fraud and stuff. So outside the financial service industry, like what brands do you think are really doing it right? What are some of the brands that you admire right now?
I mean, I definitely, I will start with REI. I think, I do work with them, but they do a great job of really leaning into their core mission and representing, like, the outward representation of their brand, or mirroring who they are as an organization, as being a co-op community. Patagonia is one as well. These are two brands that kind of stand for certain things and aren't afraid to demonstrate that, whether it means shutting down their stores or telling people not to buy their products. Those things really resonate with their audiences, and really, reflect who they are, and kind of build that long-term loyalty that a lot of brands want to achieve. And then, like I mentioned before, like Apple, this new commitment to privacy and thinking differently about how you use your device, and again, going back to trust, who you trust with your data, which company you want to give your data to or share your data with. And then I think, like, outside of the financial industry, going back to what I was saying about how brands behave and sort of the moments they create, I think there's two brands. I always kind of lean into food brands or CPG brands because I have a lot of experience on those. But Heinz Ketchup does a great job of that. I can think of very few brands that create so much conversation about something that is seemingly so everyday or boring. Seems like they're always trying to do something. They're always trying to innovate upon their product, create moments that matter to people, whether it's like an upside down label on their bottle, because people store it different ways. Or they've done some things with AI that kind of illustrate how iconic their bottle and their brand, distinctive brand assets are. They do a really good job of driving some of that conversation. And then the other being Domino's. I think over the past, I'd say, maybe like 8 years or so since they've gone on their full rebrand and positioned themselves as kind of this tech company that delivers pizzas. They've done a great job of creating experiences, creating moments, creating campaigns that really speak to their pizza loving target in unique ways. And they find incredible opportunities to kind of to again go back to their core mission of wanting to basically deliver pizzas, like good tasting pizzas as fast as they can, like things like filling in potholes on the roads. Their delivery drivers can get there quicker.
Yeah,
it's really very non-traditional thinking, but it always finds a way into the traditional channels, or the common channels, social TV. They do a really good job of creating those moments.
Yeah, that's funny what you say about moments, because I'm thinking to when you and I started our careers 15, 20 years ago. I don't remember ever really thinking about moments like that. And I mean, I think obviously it's driven by the rise of social media. There's so many more online news outlets that need to get clicks, and so there's more of an appetite for these kind of moments. But what's interesting about those too is that some of these brands, when they do create those moments, they get years and years out of some of these kind of like stunts. They are like stunts. I know Patagonia would never call them that, but like when they did that "Don't buy this jacket," or when they closed their stores on Black Friday, as an anti-consumerist thing, that was for that year. But we're still the "Don't buy the jacket" thing. What was that, 5 or 7 years ago? I mean, it was a long time ago. Same thing with some of the Domino stuff. You referenced the pothole things, probably 4 or 5 years old. But when you create these moments that are like authentic to the brand and the brand tone, they have a strangely long shelf life, considering how fast media moves now.
Absolutely. Yeah, they can definitely define your brand. They can shape your brand. And it's not to say that those brands still aren't doing the things that they need to do. Like, Domino's, I'm sure, is still throwing coupons at people
Yeah,
and
they're still doing the
doing banner
blockbusters.
ads and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But, yeah, those things definitely can shape. And I think it's interesting now with social media being maybe a little more closed off than it used to be. A lot more people going to private accounts and influencers becoming a little bit more important. It's a little bit different, but to me, like the word of mouth, the fact that people can talk about these things, they capture their attention. And within social media or outside of it too, just thinking about your family and sort of what brands come up at the Thanksgiving table. There are definitely opportunities to think of these moments as like tent poles within your brand and how they can build your brand and have a really big impact. And you can get things out of them beyond just that moment. We're talking about long-term sort of impact of them just from us remembering them, but the only reason we remember them is because they found their way into other channels. They found ways to tell that story through social media, through TV, I'm sure through sales materials. They really get the most out of those moments to build that awareness and that long-term effect.
Yeah, and I think too, the power is that they found an overlap between their brand beliefs and some kind of universal truth. I mean, I think with Patagonia, everybody's had the thought of like, man, this Black Friday stuff feels a little out of control. Or do I really need to buy all this stuff every Christmas? Or with Domino's, like everybody hates potholes, right? It's like who would disagree? And so it's that brilliant overlap of what the brand believes and then like something that the public would love to embrace.
For sure. I think with the REI closing their stores, that's like one moment in time, and it's a big impactful moment, but they consistently do things like that too. I think that's the other aspect of it. There may be one moment that's really big, but and you can get a lot out of that moment as a brand and it can define your brand, but consistently backing it up and consistently doing things that go above and beyond for the long run is really, I think, how you keep that momentum up.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of momentum, there's so many channels now that a brand can appear on. And I think, when social started, it was like Facebook began and they created the ability for a brand to make a page. Every brand made a page, right? Regardless of whether they had something interesting to say on Facebook or whether their consumers were even there. How do you, as one of the leaders of a global brand, how do you think about like where your brand should show up? Like what is that evolution like internally for you guys? And how do you think about like where your brand should appear or really any brand should appear?
Sure. Well, I appreciate saying I'm a leader of a global brand. I'm definitely not, but
well, you were one of
necessarily, yeah, not necessarily the person that's making all those decisions,
sure,
especially with the brand as complex as Capital One. But I'm somebody that experiences sort of, the consequences of some of those decisions, or sort of the opportunities that arise. And even within the work that we do in our partnerships group, we support a lot of different channels. I think, the demands in our group are pretty robust. We have to think about everything from, TV to email to social media, to UX. We're bouncing between things that are, people that spend their entire careers on. And it's because we are sort of the guardians of these brands, and we have to make sure that we're representing them well and consistently, no matter where they show up. And I think that's a big challenge, right? Like the more things you as a brand decide to participate in, the harder it is to manage them. I think there's opportunity in a lot of these things, and then there's definitely things that maybe you'd want to avoid. I think if I look at one brand that I do like is Gooder, the sunglasses brand. They're pretty good, no pun intended. They're pretty new, and they've embraced social media as a way to connect to their audience. I think they're a direct-to-consumer brand. They have 5 Instagram accounts. That's really kind of something that, like you're talking about in the days of like, let's do a Facebook page, would have been unimaginable.
Absolutely. Still seems like a heavy lift. Like,
Yeah, it still seems a little like, wow, it's, but they do it to reflect the different audiences that buy their product, and it pays off for them, as far as I know. So it's definitely worth it for them to add that level of complexity into their into the way that the brand comes to life and how they connect with people. Then conversely, there may be instances where you don't want to invite added complexity to their brand. I think some of the stuff going on with Twitter recently, brands have decided to pull out of that because of the complexity, because of the uncertainty. I think because there's so many options out there, it's really more important than ever to think about what you're doing and be intentional about it. It's not a matter of a formula of like, we do these 3 things and we pump out the marketing materials and call it a day. A lot of these things are far more complex and need to be managed on a day-to-day basis. And you need to ask yourself, is kind of the juice worth the squeeze for all these different things?
Yeah. Yeah. It does feel like we're in a kind of a pullback stage or a more intentional stage. It's just like when social channels first started to come on, it was like a new one would get popular enough, every brand would jump on it, right? A new one would come up, everybody's like, we got to get on that one too. And now there's so many that it's like what you're talking about, everyone's kind of like pulling back and saying like, well, what do we really need to be on? Where are our customers? What kind of conversation can we have there? And what's our meaningful contribution to that? And something like Gooder going really deep on one channel, again, like something like you're saying, unimaginable 10 years ago, when you would have said like, why would you like devote so much attention to one channel when you can be on 6 channels and you can be on Foursquare or whatever it was. Like, that's an interesting evolution in marketing and being more choiceful, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's like I said, it's more complex than ever, but I think with that complexity comes opportunity. So
Yeah. So I know it's hard to predict the future. None of us know exactly what's going to happen, but just based on trends that you're seeing, what consumers are reacting to, what kind of brands do you think are going to resonate in the near to midterm future? What are we seeing as like the future of branding?
yeah, incredibly difficult thing to even think about right now because things
Let's try
change
anyway.
so quickly. Yeah, I think like even 6 months ago, like just maybe people's answers to this question would be entirely different.
Yeah.
It's weird. It is hard to predict. And I think I even find myself being challenged by my own beliefs, and what I've witnessed in the past may not necessarily work in the future. So I try to keep an open mind on all of this stuff. When it comes to like how things are constantly changing. I do think that the idea that you need to really be clear about what you're trying to communicate is something that I've witnessed, or is a challenge of not mine, of the brands I've worked on, or of the situations we've been in consistently. It's really difficult to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
When you're focused on one thing, you are so much better able to get that message across. When we talked about Domino's, it's like clearly what their one thing is. Nobody's going to misunderstand that, even when it's masked in something as weird as filling in potholes in a street.
Yeah.
I think that singular main message is really important. Having an understanding of like what is the thing you're trying to communicate to people, and then also why should they believe that? I don't think this answer is revolutionary, because it's like a fundamental aspect of marketing and brand building. But it's something that is definitely can be harder to do now. Again, going back to how many channels, how many opportunities there are to have conversations, like it's really easy to want to say everything.
Yeah.
And then by saying everything, you kind of don't say anything at all. So really distilling your message down and making it simple. I do think something else that has come up that I've seen maybe with the amount of brands out there, with how many brands that I've it's maybe a little easier to start a brand now. It's kind of harder to break through.
Yeah.
Is a lot of the brands as kind of status symbols, or shaping people's, their ability or their want to fit in. I think that is definitely a thing that maybe people thought was on the decline the past couple of years, but I don't think has ever really gone away. And I think is even more maybe meaningful now in sort of this like next wave of social media that we're experiencing. So that's kind of something that I think all brands can think about, like how do they create sort of a community and get people to kind of identify with their brand, but then also have it mirror so like who they are, or their ability to, you know, tell other people that they belong to that community, or that they have an affinity for that brand, or they use that brand. I think that's kind of something that's big. And then I think that continued sort of experiences or interactions based on your core mission will always resonate with people. You know, connecting with sort of like what your purpose is and creating those moments of opportunity for people to understand their core purpose. I mean, all these answers I would say are not really shaped by anything happening in the future necessarily. They're consistently things that have mattered to brands, and I don't think that's going to stop just because, you know, things are accelerating with, you know, artificial intelligence or social media or anything like that.
Yeah. I mean, I do think though that they're shaped by your predictions are shaped by how consumers are. I mean, how the youngest consumers are, right? I mean, youngest consumers have been so shaped by the digital experience, by social media. There's so many options for everything. You have to have simplicity, right? People are just not going to wait around. And any generation shaped by the digital tools is going to feel that way. And I think the same thing with what you're talking about is like a brand's purpose or their values. It's a generation that really cares about values and business practices and things like that. And I think in tying with that, we're going to see probably more in like people being interested in a brand's purpose, but also insisting that their actual practices line up with that. Right. We've seen like the greenwashing and things like that. I think that's going to be an interesting evolution. What you're saying about simplicity reminds me of, you know, you worked on a lot of beer brands in the past, and it reminds me, I got a few windows into that culture on a few different projects, and it reminds me of how, you know, each of those major like national beer brands are kind of like about one thing. Like if you ask like Coors Light, like what's Coors Light about? Cold. That's it, right? Like the word cold is the essence of the whole brand, and everything they do is about cold. Miller Lite's like all about taste. And so they did like with this year we had a cap to lock in the taste, and then the next year we did the Vortex bottle because it delivers the taste faster. I almost think that would be a good exercise for every brand to be like, even just as a thought experiment, even if you don't execute about it, could you get your brand down to like one attribute like that, or one word, or one concept?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an incredibly hard thing to do. And I think
Yeah,
that,
not every brand only has one SKU like those do, right? But it's it's like an interesting creative experiment.
yeah, for sure. It's hard to do it, but I mean, I think if you land on something that is really true to who you are, what your product is, or what your service you're offering, it's easy to adapt and to keep evolving that sort of idea over time. And going back to what I was saying about consistency and building trust, I think you know, having that one thing as sort of an anchor that's always there
Yeah.
can be a really strong foundation to build your brand upon. And it makes it easier to do things that are even simple. I know I talked about like tying into your core purpose and mission, and that is, you know, yes, like that is incredibly important, but there are moments where you just have to get your logo out there, or you just have to create awareness. And when when people have a broad understanding of your core mission and purpose, you can do that and still get people to think about that core mission and purpose. You know, like your logo on its own can represent everything that you stand for if you've done the work to build the equity into your brand and into that logo.
Yeah. I mean, I think the brands we've talked about today do that. Patagonia and REI and even Capital One. Like I see that brand and I think about certain attributes and positive you know, perception of them. You're right. It's like sometimes you just have to be out there, and then if you do that other work the right way, then everything supports each other. It's brilliant. So lastly today, I just want to talk about kind of leading a creative team, how you get the best creative work out of people. Because I'm always interested in, you know, whether it's clients giving direction to their marketers or people working with an internal creative team. I just want to hear kind of like your personal philosophy on creative work and teamwork and how you get the best out of people.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun job, and it's a really challenging job to lead a creative team and to sort of guide people and work with people as they kind of migrate through this complicated world of branding. I think for me, one of the biggest things is to get ahead of the work. You know, if you are somebody charged with, you know, defining something or kind of building the brand, whether it's a project or a brand, you know, large scale brand as a whole, like having a vision for the future of what it can be and getting ahead of the work so that you can, you know, so your perception, your vision can be either be sort of like verified or like, you know, other people can bring it to life or challenged too. I think that's a big important part of being a successful creative leader, is being open to other people bringing new things and unexpected things that maybe either challenge your perception, your vision, or maybe more often just kind of paint it in a different way that you wouldn't have done. You know, I think I've seen that quite a bit. That's often where the best work comes from. And I think everybody needs that outside perspective, and an opportunity to be surprised at sort of how things, now their vision can come to life. So I definitely try to encourage that with the teams that I work with. And then I think another thing is just fostering an environment where everybody can freely share ideas, be generous with what inspires them, what ideas they have. You know, the thought of like, if I have an idea and I share it with you, all of a sudden there's two ideas, right? We each have two ideas of something that, and how it comes to life, and recognizing that there definitely is, you know, definitely a lot of benefit from exchanging those ideas, exchanging inspiration. It's something I try to hold myself accountable to. Sort of everybody I interact with is just sharing sort of like what I'm thinking, what inspires me. And the more I do that, the better informed I am, the better I recognize that there really are no limits to kind of what you can do as a brand. And some of the boxes that I put myself in don't necessarily need to be there. So I'd say those two things are incredibly important. Just keeping that open mind, and then fostering that environment of collaboration and sort of free thinking of ideas.
Yeah, I love that moment when you're in like a brainstorm or a meeting and you can tell somebody has something to say or like an idea, and maybe they're a little hesitant to do it, and you can draw that out of them or get them to feel comfortable to do it. And the idea is awesome, or it leads to something great. I mean, like creating that atmosphere where everybody just gets in that attitude of like, if I have something, if I have an idea, I'm going to say it. It's always better. And it creates that magic of collaboration and like you're saying, like building off of other ideas. It's the best.
Absolutely. That shared ownership of the outcome.
Yeah.
Is really important. I would say too, like, you know, definitely using we instead of I or me, and making sure that everybody understands whatever we do as a team is collectively ours in the brands that we're working on. It's not about any individual, even though the individuals are the ones that contribute. I think really magic happens, like creativity is all about connecting dots and pushing against or with things behind you. And it's hard to do that when people aren't generous in their ideas and their thoughts.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Jack, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It's been awesome to hear your perspective, and such a unique perspective working on, you know, a huge global brand like Capital One. So thanks very much.
Thanks. This is great.
Yeah. I'll link to your LinkedIn if people want to connect with you. Also Capital One, where they can hopefully see some of your work. And yeah, we'll connect again soon.
Great. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks.